Texas Representative Chip Roy recently called out what he described as an egregious abuse by the federal government, accusing it of trying to sidestep Congress to shape judicial policy. So he's here right now to talk about this. So, Congressman, let's get into this. How exactly is the government trying to overstep its bounds this time?
Well, what we have, a lot of people don't understand, is that with the federal judiciary, you have the administrative office of the courts, which technically reports up to a group of judges and ultimately the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And so they've got their different committees and their different procedures for doing things. Cutting to the chase, we got word from a lot of the judges that we know and what's going on actually on the ground that they didn't like the radical progressive left portion of the judiciary. They didn't like that you've got certain cases going to judges that we believe respect the Constitution in Texas, and that we've been getting some favorable rulings when we've got the Attorney General Ken Paxton in Texas bringing suit in a court, often because it's the court that's in that jurisdiction that makes sense. Like, for example, it might be Amarillo, Texas, or it might be another smaller town in Texas. And keep in mind that the left has for years been packing the judiciary with their radical progressive left in certain jurisdictions where they're able to then go jam through and get decisions that they like from a bunch of radical liberal judges. And so you see that in the Ninth Circuit, for example, or you see it in certain cities, even in something like the Fifth Circuit in Texas. Here you've got conservative judges issuing good opinions, issuing good orders, and now you've got this cabal within the administrative office of the courts trying to change the rule from the statutorily required district court making the decision to something that would be random assignment. Now, you've got a bunch of the bureaucrats over there that are mad at my letter saying, oh, we weren't doing this. But everybody I've talked to that's familiar with it says, no, they were trying to do that. And that would end run all of the great successful efforts by, again, the Attorney General of Texas going to these judges and getting favorable rulings against really bad policies that the people of Texas want to see stopped.
Congressman, I know you're also questioning the DOJ over, they're called civil rights groups, but I use that term loosely, who are working with the government to go after states like Virginia and Alabama who want to remove non-citizens from voter rolls. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Let me just close out on that first point, just so people understand. What I've suggested is that we shouldn't, in the House of Representatives, just take the rubber stamp of a piece of legislation that the courts want us to pass that would expand the number of judges and do things they want, unless they will commit to us that they're not going to use the bureaucracy within the judiciary to undermine our statutes. So, in other words, work with us and we'll work with you. And they didn't like that. And I'm going to be working with the House Judiciary Committee to try to push back on the judiciary overstepping its bounds. To this last point, yeah, the Department of Justice, we're concerned that they are working with these radical leftist organizations that have been active in bringing suit in both Alabama and Virginia, as you know. Now, thankfully, the Supreme Court ruled this past week, as the listeners no doubt know, that the district court in Virginia had erred and had made a bad order when that district court tried to step in and tell Virginia it couldn't clean off its voter rolls of 1,500 non-citizens. The Supreme Court stayed that decision, which was great. That was a victory for the Attorney General Mayoris and by Governor Youngkin in Virginia. I will note that Governor Youngkin appropriately pointed out that we should pass the SAVE Act, the bill that I introduced this spring that we passed out of the House in July, but that Chuck Schumer is blocking, that would require documentary proof of citizenship to register to vote in federal elections. But it's important that in this letter, we highlight the extent to which it's very obvious that the organizations involved that were filing suit in Alabama and Virginia, those are clearly connected and related to what the DOJ is doing in working directly with them. So we want to know what the communication was between those groups, because the timing is all suspect. And we want to understand exactly who's calling the shots and making the decisions. We don't have a president who's present. We've got an aggressive attorney general, an aggressive secretary of Homeland Security. I want to know who's calling the shots. So we're pushing on DOJ to answer those questions so we can understand how much these radical progressive leftist groups are actually calling the shots.
I want to go ahead and look to next week with you because, of course, we know all the House members are always up for re-election every single time. So what's at stake in the House, particularly this time around?
Yeah, well, first of all, it will do us no good to elect Donald Trump to the White House if we've got a House of Representatives that is controlled by Hakeem Jeffries and our radical progressive Democrat friends who will immediately set out to not even seat the president, right? That would be step one. Jamie Raskin has already said that he doesn't believe that they should accept the electors for Donald Trump. And then secondly, they would immediately work to impeach him. And then thirdly, obviously, they would work to defund and stop any ability for President Trump to be able to move forward. So you need a Republican House, but not just a Republican House, but a Republican House that will avoid the failures of 2017. Remember that when we had the Paul Ryan House of Representatives in 2017, Republicans dropped the ball on both Obamacare and healthcare reform, and they dropped the ball on the border. And that was a massive failure. And it led to a disaster election in 2018. And it led to then the president facing impeachment by radical Democrats. So let's avoid that here. Let's do our job next Tuesday. I believe if President Trump wins and is able to sweep the Sun Belt and do well in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, I believe that will carry the House through. And I think we'll get close to a 10-seat majority. I hope. There's a lot of really close races in the margin, and we got to show up to get it done. And I hope we'll get 52 or 3 or 4 senators. There's some close races out there. But, when we had last Friday, our friend Steve Bannon, got released from jail. And he said, and I think he was correct, that the only thing standing between us and success on Tuesday is the couch. If we do our part, if every church-going Republican, if every gun-owning Republican shows up between now and Tuesday, we will have a very successful day. But if people stay home and they allow their friends and their loved ones and their church mates to stay home, then we'll have a failure next Tuesday.
Congressman, I want to go back to what we started with, which is this matter of the judiciary. I mean, that's a great example of how important the House is and how important it is to have people who understand how this works. And, I would bet that for a lot of people in the audience, the idea that legislation controls, right, much of how the courts operate is just not something that comes up very frequently. But it strikes me as an example of just how important these elections are. Could you say a little bit more about what the stakes would be and what things would look like if they're allowed to get away with this?
Well, sure. I mean, that example is a really good one. Obviously, all of the oversight function already talked about the issues with respect to impeachment and seating the president. But let's also think about one of the first things that's going to come up in January. We're going to have to deal with the debt ceiling. We're going to have to deal with the government funding. We're going to have to deal with what we call reconciliation, which is the opportunity, if we have the House and the Senate, to do what we need to do to make sure our tax policy is proper so that we're not increasing taxes on the American people, to make sure that we're constraining spending, but also to get really important policy changes. Like, for example, the Inflation Reduction Act, which has the massive subsidies for all the solar panels and wind that are undermining American energy and undermining American energy freedom, driving up the cost of all goods and services, but particularly energy. Those kinds of things are all things that we must have the House majority for. But the things you're talking about are the things that people don't even really think through. The oversight function, checks and balances, and making sure that we're doing what we need to do. And if we have President Trump in the executive branch and you have a House that's controlled by Democrats, then you're going to get nothing but stonewalling and obstruction to what President Trump's going to need to do to undo the damage of the Biden, Harris, Mayorkas, Garland et al. Regime that has been destroying freedom in our country, that has been allowing big tech to squelch free speech, that has been targeting American citizens with the FACE Act and putting Americans in jail for simply exercising their constitutional rights, that has been undermining our security at the border, that led to the death of Laken Riley in Georgia, that led to the death of Rachel Marin and Kayla Hamilton in Maryland, that led to the death of Jocelyn Nungare in Houston, Texas, because of violent gangs that have been released on our streets. I could go on and on about the border, but these are all of the things that are hanging in the balance based on what we do on Tuesday. We need the president in the White House. We need a strong conservative House that will fight, not just a Republican House, a conservative House that will fight. And we need the Senate, and we need to stand up and actually do what we said we would do once given the ability to do so by the people.